When did a friend's selfish actions force you to choose between them and your own peace? The screech of the subway brakes, usually just a minor irritant, felt like a judgment call echoing in my skull that morning, a shrill alarm signaling the precise moment I knew I had to choose. It wasn't a choice between coffee or tea or even jobs, but something far heavier, far messier. The kind that rips through the fabric of a decade-old friendship and leaves you wondering if you were ever truly friends at all. Do you stand by someone, even when their actions reek of deceit and selfishness? Or do you cut them loose, knowing the collateral damage will be immense, potentially isolating you too? My hands were clammy despite the chill of the underground platform, and a tight knot had taken root right behind my sternum, a familiar harbinger of emotional overload. As an emotional empath, Oliver Sanchez, 46M, I found myself often burdened by the invisible weights others carried, and lately the collective baggage of my friend group had grown impossibly heavy. The first hint of this impending disaster wasn't a sudden crack, but a slow, almost imperceptible erosion like a river carving a canyon over eons. It began as most modern betrayals do, with whispers and misinterpretations, exacerbated by screens and the courage of distance. Matthew Murphy, 27M, our group's golden boy, the one with the dazzling smile and a seemingly endless supply of charm, had always been a magnet for attention, good and bad. He joined our motley crew about 5 years back, introduced by Elijah Price, 31M, who at the time was Matthew's roommate and, more importantly, still held the title of my closest confidant. Elijah, once a beacon of straightforward honesty, had been growing increasingly distant, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a brittle cynicism that chafed at everyone. He'd accuse Matthew of things, little things at first, a forgotten debt, a slight in conversation, then bigger, more biting accusations, always just out of reach of direct proof. This particular morning, the air on the platform was thick with unspoken tension, almost suffocating. We were all headed to the city for what was supposed to be a celebratory brunch for Virginia Clark, 56F, our group's resident free spirit and frankly the designated black sheep. Virginia, with her wild silver curls and penchant for blunt observations, often said things others wouldn't, which was both her greatest strength and her most frustrating flaw. She had recently landed a freelance gig that finally, after years of struggling, seemed to promise a bit of financial stability, and we were meeting to toast her small victory. Or so I thought. "You're looking a little green around the gills, Oliver," Virginia said, her voice surprisingly gentle for someone who usually sliced through pleasantries with a cleaver. She nudged my arm, her gaze sharp, missing nothing. "Rough night? Or are you just predigesting all the drama you expect at brunch?" I offered a weak smile, my stomach doing a slow churn. "Just tired, Virginia, long week." It wasn't a lie, not exactly. The exhaustion was real, but it wasn't from work. It was from the relentless emotional tightrope walking I'd been doing for months, trying to keep the peace between Matthew and Elijah, and now it seemed everyone else too. Matthew arrived then, effortlessly gliding onto the platform as if he owned the very air we breathed. He was dressed impeccably as always in a crisp linen shirt and tailored trousers, looking more like he was headed to a photo shoot than a casual brunch. He flashed his million-dollar smile, but his eyes, when they met mine, held a flicker of something I couldn't quite place, anxiety perhaps, or a predatory gleam. "Oliver, Virginia, good to see you both. Running a little late, apologies, had a minor crisis." He didn't elaborate and no one asked. It was typical Matthew, he'd drop just enough information to pique curiosity then leave you hanging. Elijah was next, stalking onto the platform with a palpable aura of resentment. He gave Matthew a look so frosty it could have formed icicles on the subway tracks. "Crisis, huh, Matthew? Or just another one of your elaborate excuses?" The air crackled. Matthew's smile faltered, replaced by a wounded expression that, to anyone who didn't know him well, would have seemed genuinely hurt. "Elijah, come on, can't we just? Not today, it's Virginia's day." Virginia, bless her heart, stepped into the breach. "He's right. Today we focus on mimosas and my new glorious freedom from corporate overlords. Save the gladiatorial combat for another time." The train rumbled into the station, a metallic groan that drowned out the tension, if only for a moment. We boarded, finding a small cluster of seats near the doors. Matthew, ever the strategist, managed to position himself next to Virginia, offering her a charming arm for support as the train lurched forward. Elijah, meanwhile, practically radiated anger from his seat directly opposite, his jaw tight, eyes narrowed at Matthew. I was sandwiched between Elijah and the window, feeling every spike of his irritation as if it were my own. The conversation, predictably, was stilted. Matthew dominated, regaling Virginia with tales of his latest business venture, something vaguely defined involving cryptocurrency and NFTs, which always struck me as suspiciously vague, even for someone who claimed to be an innovator. Virginia listened with a half-smile, occasionally interjecting with a sardonic comment that only she could pull off without sounding entirely rude. Elijah, meanwhile, scrolled through his phone, muttering under his breath. "What's up, Elijah?" I ventured softly, leaning in slightly. The train's hum was a decent cover. He didn't look up, but his fingers paused on the screen. "He's still doing it, Oliver, still taking advantage. I told you he hasn't changed." "Taking advantage of what specifically?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I knew this was dangerous territory. Elijah had been accusing Matthew of various financial misdeeds for months, ever since they had a falling out over a failed joint investment that left Elijah significantly out of pocket. Matthew, of course, claimed it was an unfortunate market downturn, a risk they both took. Elijah saw malice. Elijah finally looked at me, his eyes burning with a deep-seated bitterness. "Virginia, he's got her convinced to invest in this new project of his, just like he got me. He's going to bleed her dry, I know it." My blood ran cold. Virginia's new gig was finally giving her a buffer, a chance to breathe. The thought of Matthew charming her into some dubious scheme made my stomach clench even tighter. "Are you sure, Elijah? How do you know?" He shoved his phone at me, a text exchange glaringly obvious on the screen. It was between Matthew and someone named Investor X discussing a deal and mentioning Virginia by name, specifically her recent windfall. The language was vague, but the context implied a significant portion of her new earnings was being targeted. My heart sank. This wasn't just a petty squabble anymore. This was serious. He told me he was helping her set up a secure savings account. I murmured, my voice betraying my disbelief. Matthew had told me that just last week. He'd seemed so genuinely helpful, so concerned for Virginia. Elijah scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound. Helping her separate from her money, more like. He preys on good intentions. You know how Virginia is trusting once you get past the tough exterior. And he's so good at spinning a story. It was true. Matthew was a master illusionist of sincerity. He could look you in the eye, express profound concern, and make you believe every word, even when logic screamed otherwise. My own empathic abilities, usually a guide, sometimes felt like a vulnerability around Matthew, making me susceptible to his manufactured emotional currents. He always knew how to play on my desire to see the best in people, to smooth things over. What do we do? I asked, looking from the damning text to Matthew, who was still laughing with Virginia, their heads closed and almost conspiratorial intimacy about them. Elijah snatched his phone back. We expose him, Oliver, today at brunch. We tell Virginia the truth. A tremor ran through me. Confrontation, especially public confrontation, was my absolute least favorite thing. My entire being recoiled from it. Elijah, we can't just accuse him, not without irrefutable proof. It'll just make Virginia angry and it'll rip the group apart. It's already ripped apart, Oliver, he shot back, his voice low but fierce. You're just too busy trying to glue it back together with your own emotional energy to see it. His words stung, a pinpoint accuracy that hit my deepest insecurity. He was right, I hated conflict. I was the bridge, the mediator, the one who always tried to find common ground. But lately the ground had become quicksand. Just as I was about to respond, the train jolted violently, an abrupt, sickening lurch that threw us all forward. A collective gasp went through the car. The lights flickered, plunged into darkness for a terrifying second, then came back on, dim and unsteady. The train let out a deafening screech, a sound of tearing metal and tortured mechanics, as if it were being ripped apart from the inside. Panic, raw and unadulterated, erupted. People screamed. There was the shattering sound of glass and a woman's cry from further down the car. The train lurched again, not forward or backward but sideways, listing heavily. The familiar rumble of the tracks was replaced by a guttural roar, like the earth itself was protesting. What was that? Virginia cried, clinging to Matthew's arm, her face pale. Even Matthew, for all his composure, looked genuinely shocked, his charming facade momentarily shattered. Elijah was already on his feet, bracing himself against the seat in front of him, his eyes wide with alarm. Earthquake, he yelled, his voice barely audible above the new, terrifying sounds. It's an earthquake. The word hung in the air, a chilling pronouncement. An earthquake here, in the subway. The idea was too monstrous to comprehend. The train was shaking now, not just from movement, but from a deeper, primal tremor that vibrated through the tracks, through the floor, through my very bones. The emergency lights, a sickly yellow, flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the air filled with the acrid smell of ozone and something else, something metallic and burnt. Another violent shake, more severe this time, sent people tumbling. A sharp crack echoed from the tunnel ahead. The train finally came to a grinding halt, but the shaking continued, a relentless, terrifying shudder. The lights went out completely, plunging us into absolute darkness, punctuated only by the screams and whimpers of trapped passengers. My heart hammered against my ribs, a panicked bird trapped in a cage. I could feel Elijah's shoulder pressed against mine in the dark, rigid with fear. I heard Virginia's choked cry and Matthew's voice, surprisingly steady, trying to reassure her, though his words were lost in the chaos. Then, through the cacophony of fear and the persistent tremor of the earth, I heard it, a low, ominous groaning sound, closer than I would have liked, followed by a rush of something wet. A sudden, cold trickle of water splattered against my face, then another, and another. The groaning grew louder, joined by a new, gurgling sound. Oh my God, I heard someone whisper, their voice trembling with utter despair. It was then, in the suffocating darkness, with the train creaking around us and the ground still rumbling, that the true horror began to dawn on me. The tunnel wasn't just shaking, it was collapsing, and that rushing sound, it wasn't just water. It was the river above us, breaching its confines, pouring into the subway system. We were trapped underground, and the city's veins were filling with water. The moral dilemma of my friend's betrayal, so consuming just moments before, was instantly dwarfed by a primal, terrifying fight for survival. My carefully constructed world and the fragile peace I'd tried to maintain had just literally come crashing down around us, burying us in darkness and uncertainty. The suffocating darkness was absolute, a heavy blanket that pressed in on all sides, punctuated only by the distant screams and the horrifying symphony of groaning metal and rushing water. The air grew thick with a metallic tang and the damp chill of the incoming deluge. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat drowning out everything but the primal urge to survive. I instinctively reached out, my hand finding Elijah's arm. His muscles were rigid, taut with fear and a desperate resolve. Oliver, are you there? Virginia's voice, surprisingly clear despite the tremor, cut through the din from somewhere to my right. I'm here, Virginia, I called back, my voice shaking. Matthew. Here, Matthew's voice responded, closer to Virginia. He sounded surprisingly calm, almost professional, even as the water level around my ankles began to rise, icy and swift. Everyone stay calm. We need to assess the situation. But assessing was impossible. It was a sensory deprivation chamber filled with the sounds of impending doom. The train car listed even further, groaning as if it would split open. The water was up to our calves now, the current surprisingly strong. I heard a splash, then a choked cough. Someone fell, a panicked voice cried from further down the car. Stay put, Elijah yelled, his voice cutting through the fear with an uncharacteristic authority. Don't move if you can help it, we don't know what's under the water. A low hum, then a grinding noise echoed from the front of the train. Matthew swore under his breath. The doors, they're jammed. The emergency release isn't responding. My mind, usually a chaotic archive of other people's emotions, cleared with an alarming clarity. Fear was still a presence, but it was edged out by an urgent need to act, to find a way out. We need light, I said, fumbling for my phone. It was a foolish hope, a dying battery in a drowned tunnel, but the impulse was strong. Miraculously, the screen flickered to life, casting a weak, wavering beam. It barely pierced the gloom, but it was enough to see the churning, murky water now halfway up our shins, and the vague, terrified faces of fellow passengers. Matthew was already moving, wading through the water towards the emergency exit at the end of the car, Virginia clinging to his arm. Elijah, meanwhile, was shining his own phone light towards the ceiling, where dust and debris along with small streams of water were raining down. The tunnel's compromised, he muttered, his voice grim. We need to get out of this car. Now, just then a figure emerged from the chaotic shadows towards the front of our car, silhouetted against a faint glow from what must have been an adjacent carriage. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a purpose that felt strangely familiar even in the disorienting gloom. As he got closer, his face became clearer in the scant light. My breath hitched. Mark, I whispered, disbelief warring with the terror. Mark Gray, my estranged cousin. We hadn't spoken in years, not since a bitter family dispute over my grandmother's will that had left deep fissures and unforgiven words between us. He was supposed to be in another state, a world away from here. He squinted, then his eyes widened in recognition. Oliver, what? He didn't finish. His gaze swept over the scene, taking in the rising water, the terrified faces, the structural damage. His jaw tightened. The tunnel ahead is completely blocked. And the water's coming in fast from a breach further up. We need to try the back of the train. There's a faint light, maybe a rescue team trying to get in. His voice was calm, authoritative, a stark contrast to the panic around him. It was the same command presence he'd always had, the one that made him such a successful, albeit ruthless, business consultant. Elijah stared at Mark, then at me, a question in his eyes. You know him? My cousin, I explained quickly, my voice still laced with shock. Mark Gray. Matthew, having given up on the emergency exit, turned to us. A rescue team? How far back? Hard to tell, Mark said, already wading towards the rear of the car. But it's our only shot, we need to move. Now, anyone who can walk, follow me. Stay close, link arms if you need to. He was already helping an elderly woman to her feet. It was a side of Mark I hadn't seen since before the estrangement, a protective, responsible presence that was oddly comforting in the chaos. The next few minutes were a blur of cold water, panicked whispers, and the terrifying creak of metal. We moved slowly, a huddled group, through the knee-deep, freezing water towards the back of the train. Matthew, surprisingly, was helping Virginia, keeping her steady. Elijah, for all his earlier bitterness, was a bulwark of practicality, pointing out obstacles and helping others navigate the slippery floor. I, the emotional empath, found myself strangely focused, my senses narrowed to the immediate task, the abstract fears momentarily silenced by the concrete danger. The water was up to our thighs by the time we reached the last car, where a small emergency hatch emitting a sliver of light offered a sliver of hope. Mark was already there, pulling at the hatch with surprising strength. It's jammed, but not completely fused, he grunted, straining. Someone help me. Matthew stepped forward without hesitation, his earlier composure returning, fueled by the direct task. Together they pulled, grunting with effort, until with a groan of tortured metal, the hatch finally gave way, revealing a narrow, water-filled passage leading further into the darkness, but with the distant promise of air and safety. One at a time, Mark commanded, his voice hoarse. There's a small, inflatable raft being set up just beyond this passage by rescue workers. They'll pull you through. He gestured to the faint light at the end of the watery tunnel. We went through one by one into the cold, claustrophobic passage until it was just Mark, Matthew, Elijah, Virginia, and me left. Virginia went next, then Elijah. As Matthew prepared to follow, I saw his gaze flick to Elijah's retreating form, a flash of something unreadable, not fear, but a calculating glint. He said nothing, simply slipped into the water. Finally, it was just Mark and me. The water was now waist-deep, rising fast. The groaning of the train intensified. Thanks, Mark, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I didn't expect to see you like this. He gave a curt nod, his expression unreadable. Neither did I, Oliver. Go, I'll follow. He pushed me gently towards the hatch. I hesitated for a second, then plunged into the passage, propelled by the urgent desire for air and safety, leaving my estranged cousin in the darkness to face the collapsing tunnel alone. It felt wrong, a betrayal of the unexpected camaraderie, but his firm push had left me no choice. 2 weeks later, the smell of antiseptic still clung to my clothes, a phantom reminder of the hospital. We had all made it out, battered and bruised, but alive. The rescue had been harrowing, a crawl through partially submerged tunnels, a scramble up emergency ladders, and finally, blinking into the gray dawn light of a city reeling from an unexpected seismic event. The subway system was shut down indefinitely, a gaping wound beneath the urban sprawl. Our brunch plans, needless to say, had been spectacularly derailed. Virginia was recovering from a nasty concussion, but her spirit remained unbroken. Matthew, despite a sprained ankle, had been the picture of resilience, giving interviews from his hospital bed, painting himself as a hero, calm and collected in the face of disaster. Elijah had a few broken ribs and a deep, festering anger that seemed to have intensified rather than diminished. And Mark had disappeared almost as soon as we were above ground. A silent nod, a brief "glad you're okay, Oliver," then he was gone, swallowed by the chaos of emergency services. I sat with Virginia in her small, sunlit apartment, sipping lukewarm herbal tea. Her head was bandaged, but her eyes, though still a little hazy, held their usual sharp intelligence. So the great charmer Matthew Murphy, a true hero, eh? She mused, a wry smile playing on her lips. He was certainly good in there, I'll give him that. Kept a lot of people calm. I nodded slowly, picking at a loose thread on my sweater. He was, but Elijah told me something before the earthquake. I hesitated, looking at her. The thought of bringing up Matthew's manipulation now, after what we'd just been through, felt almost grotesque. But the lie, the potential danger to Virginia, still gnawed at me. He showed me texts. Matthew, he wasn't helping you with a savings account, Virginia. He was trying to get you to invest your new earnings in some vague crypto scheme just like he did with Elijah. He was targeting your windfall. Virginia's teacup clattered slightly against the saucer. Her eyes narrowed and the wry smile vanished. What, are you serious, Oliver? Her voice was quiet, dangerously so. He told me it was a secure, low-risk fund. Said he'd help me diversify, that it was a gesture of friendship. I nodded, feeling the familiar knot in my stomach. Elijah had proof, texts between Matthew and someone else mentioning you and your new gig, discussing how to leverage your recent liquidity. She closed her eyes, a deep sigh escaping her lips. When she opened them again, there was a flash of something I rarely saw in Virginia, not anger, but profound disappointment. I should have known, she murmured, more to herself than to me. He was always a bit too smooth, too eager to help. And Elijah tried to warn me, didn't he? All those vague accusations. She looked at me directly. And you, Oliver, why didn't you say anything sooner? The question hung in the air, a blunt accusation that resonated with my deepest insecurity. I wanted proof. I hated the thought of tearing the group apart. I kept hoping I was wrong, that it was a misunderstanding. My voice was barely a whisper. I kept trying to mediate, to find common ground when there wasn't any. Virginia reached out and squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. I get it, Oliver. You're always trying to hold things together, but sometimes holding on too tightly just breaks them faster. The tunnel collapsing was a shock, but this feels like a different kind of breach. It's hard to rebuild trust once it's shattered. She paused, then added, and speaking of breaches, Mark. Your cousin, what was he doing on that train? I explained Mark's presence, the brief, unexpected camaraderie, and his sudden disappearance. Virginia listened intently, her brow furrowed. Interesting, he seemed different, calmer somehow than the stories I heard about him. The way he took charge in there. Strange how life throws you curveballs, isn't it? A month had passed since the earthquake. The city was slowly rebuilding, a collective sigh of relief mixed with the grim reality of recovery. Our friend group, however, felt more fractured than ever, even after surviving the impossible. Matthew had continued his media rounds, presenting a polished narrative of his bravery, deftly sidestepping any mention of his business dealings. Elijah was still recovering, physically and emotionally. He refused to speak to Matthew, his bitterness a palpable wall. Virginia was quiet, contemplative, processing the betrayal. I, the perpetual mediator, found myself at a crossroads. My usual strategies of smoothing things over felt utterly inadequate. The earthquake had stripped away the polite veneers, exposing raw nerves and uncomfortable truths. I decided to act, something I rarely did directly in conflicts. I arranged to meet Elijah for coffee, a neutral territory far from the usual group haunts. He arrived, still looking pale, his eyes guarded. Elijah, I began without preamble. I told Virginia about Matthew's scheme. His head snapped up, surprise flickering in his eyes. You did? A faint, almost imperceptible shift in his posture, a slight softening. What did she say? She was hurt, disappointed. She said she should have known. I paused, then pushed on, acknowledging my own failing. And she asked why I didn't say anything sooner. She was right to ask. I was too focused on maintaining a false peace, on avoiding conflict. I let my fear of things falling apart keep me from seeing what was already broken. Elijah's gaze softened slightly, losing some of its habitual sharpness. It's not just you, Oliver. We all saw it, or parts of it. Matthew's good at what he does. And I was too angry to be effective. I just stewed in it. I let the bitterness consume me, and I probably pushed people away, including you. He looked down at his hands, a rare moment of vulnerability. I resented you, Oliver, for always trying to see the best in him, for being able to navigate his bullshit so easily when I couldn't. But it wasn't fair to you. You're a good, Oliver, sometimes too good for your own good. A sense of relief washed over me, a fragile new connection forming. I get it, Elijah, we were all stuck in our patterns, but now, after what we went through, I don't think we can go back to how things were. We need to actually deal with this. What does that even mean? He asked, a flicker of his old cynicism returning. Matthew's not going to change. He'll just find new people to charm and exploit. Maybe I conceded, but we can change how we react to him. We can protect each other, and we can try to rebuild what's left of our friendships honestly this time, even if it means letting go of what can't be saved. Our conversation lingered, not a quick fix, but a slow unearthing of buried resentments and unspoken truths. It was messy, uncomfortable, but it felt genuine, a foundation for something real. A few days later, I received an unexpected text. Can we talk, Mark? I stared at it, surprised. Since the earthquake, Mark had been a ghost. He was the one I needed to talk to about my grandmother's will, about the rift that had separated our families for so long. The earthquake had thrown us together in a way nothing else could have. We met at a quiet park. Mark looked tired, a new seriousness etched on his face. Oliver, he said, his voice flat, I am sorry about what happened with Grandma. And the will, I was angry. I handled it badly. I let my pride get in the way. The apology caught me off guard. For years, it held onto the hurt, the feeling of betrayal from my own family. But seeing him in the subway, taking charge, helping people, something shifted in my perception. I was angry too, Mark, I admitted, the words feeling surprisingly easy to say. I felt like you were cutting me out, but what we went through, it puts things in perspective, doesn't it? He nodded, looking out at the bare trees. Yeah, it does, being trapped down there knowing it could be the end. You think about what matters, and family matters, even the messy parts. He paused, then looked at me, a rare smile touching his lips. You were good down there too, Oliver. Even with all the panic, you were helping people, keeping them calm. Your empathy, it's a strength, not a weakness. His words, coming from the most pragmatic and emotionally reserved reserved person I knew resonated deeply. For years, I had seen my empathic nature as a burden, a vulnerability that Matthew so easily exploited. But in the face of true disaster, it had been a tool for connection, for understanding the raw fear of others and helping them navigate it. That evening, I called Virginia and Elijah. "I want to invite Mark to dinner," I said, bracing myself. "He apologized to me about the family stuff. He was actually good in the subway. He helped save us." There was a silence on the other end, then Virginia's voice. "Mark Gray, the estranged cousin, after all these years, it's a new beginning," I said, feeling a flicker of hope for all of us. Elijah grunted, "Might be interesting. At least he's not Matthew." A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The fracture wasn't healed, not by a long shot. Matthew was still a presence, his charming lies still a threat. But the disaster had exposed the fault lines, and in doing so had also revealed new strengths, unexpected alliances, and the quiet courage to confront uncomfortable truths. We were no longer just a friend group trying to pretend everything was fine. We were survivors, picking up the pieces slowly, painfully, rebuilding our relationships on a foundation of honesty, even if it meant acknowledging the cracks. The journey ahead was long, fraught with difficult conversations and inevitable setbacks, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were moving forward, not just clinging to the wreckage.